Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode from our podcast Land Talks, brought to you by the G20 Global Land Initiative. Today we have Dr. Baboucarr Manneh. Dr. Baboucarr, we are so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here too.
Would you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
My name is Baboucarr Manneh. I am the Director General for the AfricaRice Center and also the Regional Director for the CGIAR in West and Central Africa.
That's
Thank you.
great. Thank you so much. So, Dr. Manneh, as the Regional Director of CGIAR and Director General of AfricaRice, you have led efforts to develop over 80 climate resilient rice varieties. Wow, 80. How do these innovations contribute to mitigating the effects of climate change for farmers in West and Central Africa?
Thank you very much. That's a very good question because the varieties that AfricaRice and partners developed in West Africa actually is more than 80.
That's good to know.
Exactly, because for rice, what is interesting about rice is a very interesting crop because it's what we call a plastic crop because it grows from the highlands all the way to the what we call the valley bottoms and to the lowlands. So rice, you have different, in each of those environments, we have different types of rice, what we call the ecotypes that are adapted to those environments. So when you come to the high elevation areas, you have in some areas where you have cold stress, and sometimes you can also get even extreme temperature. So when you have those kind of situations, you need rice varieties that are adapted to extreme temperature. It can be high temperature, it can be low temperature. And then you also have problems with climate change, other aspects also like drought. Because quite often, especially in Africa, West Africa, we have the dual problem of either too much rain or too little rain. So there when you have too little rain, which is very frequent, we have problems with drought. And there you need rice varieties that are tolerant to drought. You have what you call drought-tolerant varieties. And then sometimes in the year, we get flooding also. And that many farmers lose their harvest because of the flooding. So that's the reason why AfricaRice and partners, we developed what we call flood-tolerant varieties. And there we partnered with another international institution called International Rice Research Institute, which has its headquarters in Philippines. And then we were able to get some genes that confer resistance or tolerance to rice to flooding. And now we have what we call the flood-tolerant rice that have been developed for Africa and already released in Nigeria, in Sierra Leone, Gambia, and many countries in West Africa. Even now, even Madagascar, they have flood-tolerant rice varieties that are helping with areas that are hit by cyclone. Because you know Madagascar, because of climate change, very frequently they get cyclone problems.
Yes.
And there are other rice varieties with climate resilience. We have developed them, and with support from donors, from partners like African Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, World Bank, we are making sure that those climate resilient varieties, we are spreading them, giving them to the farmers so that farmers can become more climate resilient.
Very good. Thank you so much for this. So, with nearly 3 decades of experience in agriculture research, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities in advancing agricultural research and development in Africa? And how can these efforts align with global land restoration goals?
This is a very excellent question because when you come to Africa, the crop production in Africa or even agricultural productivity in Africa, every time the practitioner, that is the people who are trying to develop the system, even the sponsors, they get frustrated. They say there is so much potential, but people cannot eat potential. We have to make sure that that potential is translated into real results so that we get Africa to become food self-sufficient and even an exporter of food in the future. But how can we do that is because of the serious challenges that we have. And one of those big challenges are the policies. Because a lot of our government policies are not giving enough support to the agriculture in a sustainable way in our countries. And we really need much stronger government investment in the agriculture sector. When we look at the government, the annual budgets that are allocated to agriculture in most African countries is less than 5%. And what we know, the minimum is really 10% that the governments have to put of their annual budget needs to go to agriculture to make the sector more performing so that the researchers can get resources to be able to do more research and develop technologies in the various countries. And the technologies that are adapted, they can do the scaling of those so that the countries don't need to depend on the projects. So it's
Yes.
very important that governments are able to invest more in their own national agricultural development. The policy is very important. That's one of the main challenging areas. And another big challenge is climate change. When we talk about climate change in Africa, it's one of the regions that is most vulnerable to climate change. And we are seeing those effects. We go to West Africa, you have reduced rainfall, but also it's unpredictable. Now farmers don't know when it's going to be the beginning of the rainy season or the ending of the rainy season. Quite often the beginning of the rainy season now is later. So when they used to plant earlier, now they have to plant a bit later. And then even when they plant late, sometimes you find within a very short period, so much rain is falling so that it's difficult for farmers really to adjust. So
Yeah.
now it's because of the unpredictability of the rainfall, and then we have more the extreme events. And also the coastal areas, we have more salinity problems. In some of those coastal areas, you find out that saline water from the ocean has now gone more inland. So a lot of those rice lands in what we call the mangrove areas have been lost because of climate change.
Yes.
And then you have the heat stress also. Now you find even during the periods when farmers used not to experience heat stress, now we are having heat stress, which is causing more sterility and more yield loss in farmers' fields. So definitely climate change is a major challenge, which is no longer a theory for Africa. It is a reality that across the African continent, we are seeing the effects. If you go to West Africa, regularly we are having the effect. This year also in Eastern and Southern Africa, we have very serious and devastating droughts in Malawi, in Zambia, going all the way to South Africa. So definitely climate change and also policies, these are key challenges for the continent for
Yes.
agricultural development. Of course, infrastructure has been there all along. Infrastructure is a major challenge because sometimes you have farmers produce good production and they cannot get to the markets because the road networks are very poor. Sometimes the communication networks are very poor. People are farmers, or maybe the urban community may not be aware of where cheap food can be available locally, and they'll be there waiting for imports when farmers produce a lot and their produce is rotting in the rural areas. So you have all those things are real serious challenges. Infrastructure, and then you talk about the climate change and you talk about the government policies. Seriously, there are a lot of challenges, but then there are a lot of opportunities also, because one of the main opportunities for Africa is that our population is a young population, and as you know, young people have a lot of talent and a lot of intelligence and a lot of skills.
Yes.
So definitely that's a huge potential for Africa, whereby definitely we need to tap into that. Unfortunately, if you look at the agriculture value chain, youth are presently not that much involved. So most of our agriculture is in the hands of the old people, and then we know when it comes to technology, it's the youth. So that means if we really want to entice the youth to go more into agriculture, we have to make sure that technology is much more invested, mechanization. These are what really attract the youth. So that when you have agripreneurship and things like that, then you find when you do that, we can bring the youth and also more women involvement in the agriculture value chain. So there are lots of opportunities definitely to be able to strengthen our value chains, make them much more stronger and much more performing, to make sure that African agricultural productivity increases to a level whereby we can be able to feed ourselves and also eventually start exporting. Because as you know now, Asia is getting to the point, particularly Southeast Asia and South Asia, getting to a point whereby land expansion is no longer possible. But Africa has a lot of land for expansion.
Yes.
But then, as we know, area expansion is not efficient. So we have to try to improve the yields in Africa, because average yields in Africa are very poor, because farmers usually are not getting access to enough fertilizers, good fertilizers, even organic fertilizer, but also even inorganic fertilizers. So fertilizer utilization and access in Africa really needs to improve. So definitely the challenges are there, but lots of opportunities to really make this sector very highly performing and then address even the world food challenge also.
This is perfectly covered. Thank you so much. Thank you, Doctor. So, Dr. Manneh, you have cultivated strong partnerships with organizations across Africa and Asia. How have these collaborations contributed to the success of projects like the Africa-wide rice breeding task force, and what lessons can be applied to broader land restoration initiatives?
Thank you very much. Actually, just as a reminder, AfricaRice, our modus operandi actually is partnership. So when the association was set up in 1971 by 11 member countries, they say this has to be a partnership-based organization, because those countries formed the association mainly with the objective to make sure that this association, it initially used to be called West Africa Rice Development Association, so that this organization can help the countries address their need for self-sufficiency in rice in their countries. But eventually, many African countries said, this organization, what they are doing, we also need their support. So we have more countries are joining AfricaRice till eventually we got up to 28 members that have joined AfricaRice. So that's the reason why the partnership is very crucial for us. So the partnerships usually, we are from advanced research institutions, like from what we call from northern area, like European institutions, from Asia, like from China, Japan, Korea, but also even from USA also, and even Brazil, Latin America. So we have those partnerships to have highly advanced research institutions, but also with all the development partners like South-South Cooperation also. So that partnership that has helped very much in developing the technologies. Like AfricaRice, one of our flagship technologies is what we call NERICA, New Rice for Africa. So in that development, the Japanese government really invested very seriously, but of course we have UNDP and others also, African Development Bank, that contributed in the development of these technologies, but also in the dissemination. So partnership has been very, very key, and even the flow-tolerant varieties I mentioned, we have had a partnership with the International Rice Research Institution, but also we are partnering with other organizations, like for example, we have CIAT, which is also another CG center in Colombia. We were able to partner with them to get nutrition-dense, mineral-dense rice. That means highly nutritious rice varieties with high zinc content. We are able to develop them and already be released in some countries. In South Korea also, we have a very strong partnership there with the South Korea Research Institution, what called RDA. That project also, presently we have 39 African countries that are a member of that association with South Korea. And then together with AfricaRice, we are developing rice varieties using the Korean expertise and Korean germplasm, which is intermarried with African rice germplasm to get new materials that are high yielding but also very nutritious and very delicious. And then African countries have started releasing those varieties, and the partnership is training the African scientists so that they have a better capacity to be able to develop new technologies that will be much more better performing than what exists right now. So partnership is really at the core of the business for AfricaRice, and we value it very highly.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manneh. Let's go for our final question. From your extensive experience, what is one consistent truth about land restoration? Something you can confidently say will occur when restoring ecosystems and landscapes in your area of expertise.
For me, one thing which is very, very important to capture when you talk about land restoration, if you really want to make sure that you capture the interest of the population but also of the governments, that means you have to show positive impact on the livelihoods of the people. So whatever technology, whatever approach we really want to bring, it has to have a positive impact. When we talk about livelihoods, we are talking about agriculture. That means we have to make sure that the technologies, when it's land restoration, it has to be able to allow farmers to produce more, but at the same time also much more sustainably. So this is the important that land restoration, we have to capture those two components. More productivity, higher productivity, but at the same time also more sustainability of the material. That means the land that we are using. And where the lands are degraded, we have to strive to make sure that we are able to rebuild them to that capacity where they are able to have a very high productivity level.
Dr. Baboucarr Manneh, we are very pleased to have you today in our podcast, and we would like to have you more and more because you have loads of experience and loads of inputs, and I think our listeners would love to hear more from you. Thank you very much for being with us today. And for our listeners, stay tuned for more and more episodes from Land Talks podcast, brought to you by G20 Global Land Initiative. Thank you and goodbye.